In Rivian Highway Assist, how does Regen work, and how is it able to move the brake pedal and somehow still get regen? Let's go for a drive and find out. Regenerative braking. When the vehicle uses the motors to slow you down instead of the friction brakes, it puts the energy to good use and charges your battery back up again. So why wouldn't your vehicle use that when you're in cruise control? Well, honestly, I was kind of concerned about that. Not long after I took delivery of my R1S, I noticed that when in highway assist and cruise control, the brake pedal actually was moving. So did that mean that I wasn't getting regen? Well, that's why I decided to do this experiment. Before we get into the testing, I just want to point out none of this is confirmed by Rivian, and I'm not an automotive engineer. I just did some independent testing and research, and I wanted to share what I found with you. If I get anything wrong or you feel like something needs clarification, please don't hesitate to do so below. So a little background on how braking systems work. There are brake-by-wire systems where a brake pedal is not physically connected to anything, it's just a sensor essentially, and then it's all electronically controlled from there. R1 does not fall into this category. The R1 has a more traditional system where the brake pedal is physically linked to the hydraulic brakes. But regardless of whether you're using a more traditional physically linked brake system or a brake-by-wire system, it's the brake booster that makes all of the magic happen. In case of R1, I suspect it's probably using Bosch's iBooster. I don't know this for sure, but regardless of which specific model Rivian is using in R1, there are two ways to actuate the brakes. Number one is with the pedal. When you physically push on the pedal, it will create pressure in the brake lines. The second method is with a motor inside of the brake booster. This motor can also actuate the brakes and build pressure in the brake lines. This happens, for example, when automatic emergency braking kicks in, when the vehicle wants to use the brakes to slow down for highway assist or cruise control, any of those situations. Since it is a physically linked system, when this motor is used, the brake pedal will naturally move with it because it, again, is physically linked to the hydraulic system. Here's how I set up the test. I had a camera down on the footwell so we could see physically how much the brake pedal is actually moving. I also had service mode pulled up on the main display so I could see exactly how much current was going into or out of the high voltage battery. Negative numbers means that it's pulling current out of the battery. Positive numbers mean that it's charging the battery. So I went out for a drive, and honestly, this was a great learning experience for me. As a baseline, I drove around without any cruise control or highway assist, just me and one pedal driving. I had it set to high regen with regen assist turned off. Regen assist can sometimes blend in the physical brakes if regen is limited, for example, because the battery is too cold or you're at a high state of charge. But I had that turned off just so I could get the raw regen numbers. When reviewing the footage after, what I noticed very quickly is the brake pedal just doesn't move at all. The only time that I get any kind of movement out of the brake pedal is when you're just about to come to a stop. We're talking maybe 2, more likely 1 mile an hour, just rolling to a stop, and it physically engages the brakes for auto hold. But beyond that one specific scenario, it just doesn't move at all. Just that very end little click in that you can see there. As you can see in these scenarios, there are large spikes of energy going into the battery, so it is using regen. I do have to apologize for the quality of this recording here. Unfortunately, there was some sun glare on this camera, and the service mode display only seems to update once per second, but it can at least give us a vague idea of what is happening with regen, even if it's not the most precise. The next phase of my test was using cruise control. I didn't necessarily expect cruise control to behave any differently from highway assist when it comes to regen, but I wanted to do the test just to be comprehensive. And the results of this test were actually kind of surprising to me. I noticed that as I was driving around, if there was any amount of deceleration at all, the brake pedal always moved, but to the same position every time. Regardless of how much or how little regen, the brake pedal moved just a tiny fraction and then stayed there. No more, no less, every time, just right there. And this was consistent and repeatable. Under acceleration, the brake pedal's at rest. Under any kind of deceleration, just the slightest movement to the same spot every time. And then if it did come to a stop, it would kind of lock down into that same auto hold position as one pedal driving. It is also worth noting that when the brake pedal moved to this one specific position that it moved into over and over again, that there were large spikes of energy going into the battery. So there at least was some amount of regen happening. So then I took it on the highway and I noticed the same pattern again. Anytime there was any kind of slowing down, the brake pedal over and over again just moved into that same position. No more, no less. And while it was doing that, there were large spikes of energy going in. So what is it doing? Why is the pedal just moving that same amount every time, regardless of how much deceleration we're experiencing? Well, I think what's happening is it's just removing slack from the system. It's very normal to have slack in the braking system. This just comes naturally with a hydraulic braking system. And it can also be due to things like brake pad wear. As the brake pads get smaller, they have to travel a farther distance to get down into the rotors. Essentially, what's happening is it's just removing that slack. It's pre-charging the system and getting the brakes ready to go. It's moving the pedal into a position where if either you or the system decides that it needs the physical brakes, they are right there ready to go. No slack, the brakes are just ready. For all intents and purposes, the physical brakes actually aren't being used to slow the vehicle down. If the brake pads are in contact with the rotors at all during this process, they're just grazing it and not causing any amount of deceleration that's meaningful or can move the needle, so to speak. It's almost entirely regen. The brakes are just ready if it does need them. And it only really does do that if it's extremely heavy braking or if you're about to come to a stop and it locks in for auto hold. So what's the upshot? Yes, Highway Assist and Cruise Control are very much using regen to slow the vehicle down and maximizing efficiency. Now, I realize that for many of you, this may be a no duh moment, but I really wanted to understand not only if it was using regen, but how the system was working and why the brake pedal was moving. So this was a great learning experience for me, and I wanted to share it with you. What do you think? If you've made it this far, thanks for joining me for the learning process. I'm going to put in a shameless plug for my referral code down below if you feel like this helped you understand Rivian a little bit more.
It will use...
The short answer, yeah, of course it does. Don't be silly. But how much is it using and how on earth does it move the brake pedal and somehow still manage to get regen at the same time? If you're interested in finding out, keep watching.
But before we get...